Boris has been absolutely firm. He's laid out our position. We want a zero tariff, zero quota, super Canada style free trade agreement. But if the EU won't agree to that, which is hugely in the European Union's interest, then we'll accept the same relationship between the UK and the EU that the EU has with Australia, which is basically WTO with some side agreements. We have the upper hand, and it's not really about winning and losing. We can't give in to what the European Union really want, which is that we're out of the European Union, but still under all of their rules and regulations. That's not taking back control. It's not what we promised at the referendum. It's not what we promised at the general election. So we have got a mandate to deliver on Boris's negotiation stance. I've got great confidence in our negotiators. Already we've seen major changes that the negotiation is going to happen in our country. They're coming to us. The negotiation is going to take place in English. All this is the opening to what I hope will be a very, very successful free trade agreement, and it can be over very, very quickly. I spoke to Boris before the general election, and he gave a commitment that no deal, walking away, is still on the table. It has to be, because that's what guarantees we do get a good free trade agreement in the time frame that we're talking about. It's clearly, obviously, in the EU's interest that they would like to extend the transition period, because that means we'd carry on paying money into the European Union. We could go into another spending round, which would enhance our commitments to them. But what I got out of Boris was that if it's clear we can't negotiate the free trade agreement we desire, which is, I believe, in both our entities' interests, that we walk away and we do not pay the 39 billion so-called divorce bill. What I didn't want us to get caught up in is that we negotiate until 11 o'clock on December the 31st, don't get a free trade agreement, and we've paid in an awful lot of money. Obviously, the fact that Boris is now suggesting that we have a review in June, and if it's clear we cannot come to an agreement, we leave on WTO terms then, because that saves us paying in another net £6-7 billion, wasting our time for the rest of the year. And also, it gives us more resources of negotiators to concentrate on a successful deal with the USA. And that is a deal that's made in heaven, because when we calculate how much trade we do with the USA, we believe we've got a considerable trade surplus with the USA. And when they do their calculations, they believe that they've got a surplus with us. Well, that sounds like a win-win scenario. You know, over 1 million UK citizens go to work every day in companies in the UK owned by Americans, and over 1 million Americans go to work every day in the USA in companies owned by British people. We want to be treated as a sovereign independent nation, which we are now we've left the European Union. A huge market for EU goods, bigger than any of those other countries they've already done successful free trade agreements with. So we want to be treated as a sovereign independent nation and respected for that. What we were looking for is mutual recognition of standards, not the same regulations. When you start negotiations, you lay out, you know, what you'd really like to get, because obviously if you don't do that to start with, you're never going to get any more than that. You're only ever going to get less. And I understand their position. They don't want a vibrant, competitive trading nation on their border. And their big fear is obviously that other nations will look over into UK, prospering outside the European Union, doing free trade deals around the world, our economy growing faster than the European Union, and think we're leaving next. To be honest, that's not the UK's problem. I think the EU could survive, but it needs to reform itself, something it's been very reluctant to do. And I think one of the problems with the mode of European integration and the speed that they've looked to move to a federal Europe is that the political elite in Europe have desired this and pushed it along, but I don't believe they've ever taken the people of those European countries with them. And I'm afraid they're going to have a political backlash for that, and I think we're seeing that in the European elections. Well, it's interesting, during the referendum campaign, and I led the Leave campaign for the East Midlands, I met with a representative of the Polish community in my seat of North West Leicestershire. We had a very long talk for an hour or so, and at the end of it he said that he was reassured by my comments that European workers were needed and valued in the UK post-Brexit. And he said that although his community would not have a vote on the referendum because they were EU citizens. If they had, he would have recommended that they voted to leave. And the fact that more than 3 million EU citizens have decided that their best future for themselves and their families post-Brexit is to remain and work and live in the United Kingdom, I think that's a huge endorsement of the optimism around they have for our post-Brexit future. And I just wish that all parliamentarians, especially those in the opposition parties, had that same confidence that I share with the EU migrants about our country's future after we've left the European Union. I think we get the impression from the Theresa May administration that she listened to the civil service, she listened to Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, and she saw Brexit as a damage limitation exercise, whereas what it actually is a huge opportunity for us to play a massive part in world trade. We're back on the WTO. We can lead concerted efforts by our old friends in the Commonwealth, who are 33% of the WTO representatives, to liberalise trade. Free trade has and commerce has lifted billions of people out of poverty over the last few decades, and I think we have a massive opportunity to be a force for good in the world and to, again, improve the living standards for people across the globe. Well, of course, for those who don't respect the referendum results and don't want us to leave the European Union, there's always an excuse for a delay. There's no excuse. These are negotiations between very few people which are going to be carried out in London, and what you're seeing is that the British government is getting accolades for dealing with the current coronavirus epidemic better than other European nations. We're the best place to have those negotiations. They can't be delayed, they're very straightforward. It is a matter of, can we have tariff and quota-free trade for our mutual benefit, or are the EU so dogmatic that they'll put the potential preservation of the European Union above the well-being of their citizens? It's a huge test for the European Union. The situation we find ourselves now, having left the European Union with Boris's deal, entering into these talks, is completely different to where we'd have been under the Theresa May deal previously, which I voted against every single time, along with, at the end, 28 colleagues known as the Spartans. Had that bill passed, we'd have been in a very weak position. So now we're in a position where we've got a majority Conservative government with a mandate again from the people to leave the European Union. We've officially left. We've now got 9 months to negotiate a free trade agreement. It's a free trade agreement unlike any other because we've got the same regulations and rules currently as the European Union. No free trade agreement between two different countries has ever had that level playing field to start with. It is a matter of, what do you EU want to do? What I can assure you is these negotiations, due to the compressed timescale, 9 months, and there's no way that we're going to be extending those 9 months. It's either going to be we're going to get full, which we're asking for, tariff and quota-free trade, as we've got at the moment, or it will be WTO. There is no time, with the bureaucratic nature of the European Union, representing the interests, which are very disparate, of 27 different countries, to go line by line through all the tariffs on all the products that we sell to each other. Obviously, the Germans don't want tariffs on cars, the Greeks won't want tariffs on olive oil. They haven't got time for that. So it's going to be very much all or nothing. It's a high-staked poker game, but we've got most of the cards. We will be the biggest market for EU goods. We buy far more from the EU than we sell to the EU. It's the only part of the world where we have a huge trade deficit. That means we're the customer. And in my book, as in all the business books, the customer is king. So that gives us a great game to play. And on top of that, because we're now able to negotiate free trade agreements around the world, parallel discussions with the United States, who also want a free trade deal with us, that puts pressure and creates a competitive market, which is going to encourage the European Union, if they want to serve their citizens and their businesses as they should, to negotiate that tariff and quota-free free trade agreement that we want.